Welcome to Mondays with Melissa. We are up to question 4 in the top 5 questions about elder law, estate planning, and Medicaid. These are the most asked questions that people ask on the internet and things like that about elder law, estate planning, and Medicaid. And the number 4 question is, what is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? And there is quite a difference. So Medicare is a federal program. It's a federal program for people 65 and older, or some people with disabilities. Medicaid is a joint federal and state program, which is geared towards helping pay for healthcare costs for eligible individuals. So in our population that we deal with, what does it really look like when you're talking about the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? And what I like to tell people is Medicare is a short-term payer. Medicaid is a longer-term payer. So Medicare, as you know, for most people, it's your primary, and then you have your supplemental. Some people have Medicare Advantage plans, but for the most part, when you go to the doctor, you need prescriptions, things like that, you have some kind of Medicare and supplemental that are going to help pay for those types of costs. If you go into the hospital for something, if you have a surgery, things like that, that's going to be your Medicare and your supplemental insurance or your Medicare Advantage plan. Whatever your co-pays might be, that's going to be on an individual basis. But what happens then when you end up going home from the hospital, or you go to a rehab from the hospital? Well, if you go home, usually Medicare will cover a few weeks, maybe a couple of weeks of a few days of a home health aid to get you acclimated back at home. But that's it. If you go from a hospital to a rehab, you can get up to 100 days covered by Medicare. The first 20 days paid in full. From days 21 to 100, a copay, which may or may not be covered by your supplemental insurance. So that's a very important question to always ask, if your particular supplement will cover those copay days in a skilled nursing facility. Now, even though you get up to 100 days, doesn't mean you're going to automatically get 100 days, and Medicare can cut you off if they feel you've plateaued and you're not making any more progress with physical therapy. So even though you get up to 100 days, you might only get 30 days or 40 days or something like that before Medicare says, okay, now you either have to go home or you have to go into a long-term bed. So again, if you go home, maybe you'll have some short period of coverage with some home care, but eventually if you need consistent aids coming in, you're going to want to look to the Medicaid program to cover that long-term home health care, because your Medicare is not going to cover it and your supplement's not going to cover it. If you end up having to go into the long-term unit of a nursing facility, then you are absolutely going to be looking at Medicaid, because Medicare is going to cut off during that rehabilitation period, or at the most at 100 days, and then you need a payer source. Otherwise, you're going to be paying out of pocket. So the biggest difference between the two, I would say, is the short-term payer of Medicare, the long-term payer of Medicaid. Of course, there's differences in the fact that one's federal, one's state and federal, and that gets into the minutia of who pays what. But for the purposes of, making a decision about moving forward with healthcare or planning, that's really the important piece that you need to know. It's the short-term payer versus the long-term payer. And I am more than happy to speak to people about this in more specific circumstances, because different things often come up. Sometimes if people have a wound, they might have some wound care covered by Medicare, and once that wound heals, then that Medicare ends, and then we're looking at long-term again. So there are a lot of little nuances that kind of come up, but for the most part, you're going to want to look at doing your planning so that you qualify for Medicaid in the future should you need any sort of long-term care. And of course, there's long-term care insurance, which is also an important product to look into to see if you qualify medically, and if you can afford to pay for it, because that can also help towards the cost of the longer-term care that you might need. So that's the basic differences between Medicare and Medicaid. That's number 4 in the top 5 questions asked about Medicaid, estate planning, and elder law. So come back next week for number 5, our final question. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you then.